boundaries. What comes from the earth must be met with responsibility and respect. These teachings are often treated as indigenous wisdom, but they are also economic instructions, guides for how to shape systems that honor place rather than exploit it. Today, Native nations, not only in our country, but around the world, stand at the threshold of a rare and defining opportunity. Not because federal agencies shifted their priorities or because philanthropy discovered Indian country or because another cycle of grant funding has become available. The reason is simpler and it's more profound. The global energy transition is reorganizing the economy, and the lands and resources that indigenous people in our country have collectively owned for, and I say owned, not steward, owned for thousands of years, now sit at the center of what the world needs. In this time of energy economy, place is the most strategic economic advantage. And I say that not metaphorically, but geopolitically, environmentally, and economically. Energy is the fuel for the transformation for this modern economic system for tribes, but only if tribes and industries shift our thinking from extraction to partnership, from programs to economies, from development to integration. This is, I'm not making this a slogan or making it sloganish, but it's a blueprint. It names the shifts that are going to be required in this moment if if we're truly going to be different than the eras from coal, oil, login, uranium, or federal dependency. So today's seminar is designed to have a conversation about the future opportunities in the nuclear industry space for tribes. This seminar is not about advocating or opposing nuclear. It's about forming and learning from each other about nuclear. As we say at the Colorado School of Mines and at the Payne Institute, we're not out to win arguments. We're out to find solutions. Let's attack the issue, not each other, is the way I think about this. The conversations today will traverse topics like how tribes may capitalize on the energy sovereignty in the age of nuclear, what education, policy, or discussions need to be shared with communities. And for tribes already having these discussions and projects, how do we help ensure that tribes play a central role in directing nuclear development projects? We hope that today's seminar will provoke thought, inspire conversations to continue beyond the seminar, and spark thought leadership about how Indigenous genius can inspire an even better future for those that are waiting to come into this world. So with that being said, I'd like to offer just a quick overview of the panels. The first panel we have is the Tribal Energy Sovereignty and Legislative Priorities, and this is going to be moderated by Mr. Chris Deschene, from the National Intertribal Council Board. He's a board member and executive director. Panel 2 is going to be focused on considerations for project development and pathways for permitting, moderated by Mr. Scott Lathrop, founder of and CEO of Native Nuclear. And panel 3 will wrap up the day with next-gen technologies and partnering opportunities, moderated by Ms. Jessika Hernandez, the Director of Federal Programs and Strategic Initiatives at Native Nuclear. And I want to remind you as we go through the day today that with the 3 panels, they'll each have 30 minutes, followed by Q&A. And please leave your questions in the Q&A panel as you think of them throughout the conversation. Sometimes great questions are better than a great answer. So please share your questions with us. And before I hand it back over to Chris here, I would ask that, we share our thoughts and ask for that guidance from our creator, our spirits, however it is you believe, to help us through this morning. So with that, I'll ask our mother, father, and all our spirits. So I ask of you to come to help us. To do for us. Nice, just chin our thought mother. With our pets need to bless us with thinking that everything that's yours. Life, wish you happiness, you health. Bawash Jumi, Benazi, but Yawajin, bless us with that. Well, Hashjit Zesh, Goyot Zesh, Iach, the elders, our children, Kutawat Ash, Altoite Trash, that they're well today. Mutet Samat Gutsa, Goish Butch Siemishit, Hemite Kutawat Ash, Altoite Trash, that are men and women that are in the military, overseas, or wherever they may be, that they're well, not in harm's way. And Naish just Chinako, our thought mother, to bless us with the thoughts to work through this as your children, as a family, that we find good energy and good solutions in even in diverse thoughts, to help us to all be strong. And as we part our ways today, that our families are blessed with the knowledge and wisdom and laughter and joy that we may have found even in this moment of discussion. And everyone that is here today, to give them the strength, their health, and their happiness to make their work. The work's not hard, the work's not heavy as we go forward. I'll ask of you, Mother, of those blessings and what's the get it you put you to sat you still no to that all the different directions we ask that you bring your blessings and protection for us, even for those that we don't know the name that yet come and that bless us today. So it's a damn and marshal good again. Amen. Have a good day, everybody. So, Chris, at this point, turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Governor. And again, welcome everyone. My name is Chris Deschene. I'm a member of the Navajo Nation. In our traditional ways, Chris Deschene Dashajine, Twadajini Slow, Deschene Bashichin, no da Tachini Dashache, Ada Topahan Dashana, Agut Adanen, Kihakwa Side Basha Agi by Hanison. Just a few words to say thank you and to share my place amongst my people in terms of my relations, and also to thank the leaders that are here today in terms of the opportunity to share a few words. I will be moderating this panel titled Tribal Energy Sovereignty and Legislative Priorities. We will, under this panel, explore how sovereignty shapes nuclear energy policy, how tribal nations can engage in legislative and regulatory conversations that define their energy futures. Panel will also look to identify current opportunities regarding policy and challenges in advancing those nuclear partnerships. I would also like to share that as a foundation, we would talk to a little bit about the cultural components that are really the foundation of tribal sovereignty. And what I have in terms of guests with me on this panel are representatives from the Shoshone Bannock tribes, and that's Elena Edmo. We also have from Idaho National Laboratories Hope Morrow, and of course, you just heard Dr. Richard Luarkie from Laguna Pueblo. So what I would like to do is give each panelist a moment to briefly introduce themselves and share a few words about their experiences. So I will start with Elena.
Why don't we start with Dr. Luarkie? It looks like Elena's having trouble getting onto the Zoom.
Sure. Okay, so let's move to Dr. Luarkie.
Okay, well, good morning again, everyone. Again, you've heard my introduction already, so I'm not going to repeat that. Other than to, just the opening remarks specific to the topic here about, we're at a place in time where we need to be able to look at all energy sources, all of the above, if you will, as we look to our future. Right now, again, I mentioned in my opening comments, I come from the Pueblo of Laguna, which is or which was a mining tribe. So we had uranium from 1952 to 1982. But I say we've been in the business for 70 years because after the closure, we're still dealing with cleanup. And so what do we do with the tailings? What do we do with, those elements that were left behind? Because when industry left, they just left. Right? So, but how do we get benefit from that? So I think right now, when I think about things like where does sovereignty intersect with energy and economics and going forward, in my mind, and having been a tribal leader before, one of the big things that we are going to have to do as tribes as is do a better job of working together. I've been in many, many meetings, and I'm sure some of you have been in those meetings. Tribal unity, we need to work as one. We need to, be unified, and we sing this beautiful song of working together, right? But sometimes dancing to that song, we have two left feet. When we can learn to dance to that song, it strengthens our sovereignty. But we also need to be able to elevate sovereignty from not just using it as a shield, but we have to learn to use it as a sword. And not a sword to just butcher and those kind of things, but to be able to strategically cut pathways into the future, kind of like a Swiss Army knife, right? We've only used one blade, and it's kind of like that old saying that if you only have one tool, if your only tool is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? We have to figure out how do we use these strategic tools of sovereignty, to go forward. And in particular, in the application of energy, it becomes absolutely critical because I look at energy from maybe two different lenses. One being the things that it powers for us, like the very call we're on today on Zoom and the technologies that powers, um, uh, but also the reminder that whether it's coal or uranium or copper or whatever comes out of the earth, we're of the same creation. We're of the same core. We have different purposes. But I think and what I'm trying to get at is where do we find the balance in our inherent sovereignty as well as our legal sovereignty? Two different things, I believe. And so we need to be able to balance those elements in the context of energy and in today's conversation in the context of nuclear. And how do we use that as a tool to not only advance our economies, but also educate, build benefit back to our communities? What are the policies that we need to develop that are going to enhance that? I think if there's a time to change those things we've been critical of that we can do different, this is that time. So I'll just go that far and allow the others to comment.
Thank you, Governor. Let's turn to Miss Hope Morrow from Idaho National Labs.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Hope Morrow. Can everyone hear me okay? I think okay. My Zoom is having a little bit of a morning. Good morning, everyone. My name is Hope Morrow. I'm the Director of Workforce and Economic Development Programs at Idaho National Laboratory. I'm also the co-founder of the Idaho Advanced Energy Consortium, which is a 501c6 nonprofit organization geared at specifically two main areas, which is to help drive advanced energy technologies to market, in particular in the Intermountain West, and then supporting communities if they seek to locate those technologies, if they would like those technologies in their communities. This nonprofit is geared at advocating for those communities, advocating for those technologies, and helping kind of navigate that process. So really excited to be here today to hear the conversation and get to participate in it.
Thank you, Hope. Samantha, do we have Elena with us now?
It doesn't look like it. I'll let you know if she pops in though.
Okay. So we will continue and hope for the best that she's able to join us. I'd like to start with a foundational question as it relates to tribal sovereignty, and that's really just to set some foundation. And we heard a lot from you, Governor, but we want to look at maybe educating some of our viewers, and as this is recorded and shared throughout Indian country, we want to talk about some foundations. And to that end, um, most folks know, at least in the tribal legal world, that sovereignty is the inherent right for a tribe to make decisions for its people, its resources, and to its governance. The question that I'd like to share is, where and how does culture and traditions of a tribe support its foundations with respect to sovereignty?
I in those kind of questions, I always say, one tribe, right? We all interpret that how we apply our sovereignty different. Um, but I think culture is significant here but the way I think about it is it's through our thought leadership, the ability to analyze outcomes and solutions. I think our ancestors, our elders um, were analytics, if you will. To be able to they looked at it through the lens of problem solving. They didn't look at things as a legal problem. They looked at things as almost like as an engineering problem. How do we solve this problem? And I think sovereignty today, I always say our native people, we come from a culture of genius, a culture of intellect. We need to reactivate that in an engineering type framework and problem solving when it comes to this type of work. So I'm coming at it from probably a unusual perspective. Um, because the legal construct right now of sovereignty that we all work in, that legal construct is someone else's definition. The analogy I always give is that in order to have that sovereignty in the US, you have to be a federally recognized tribe. But to be a federally recognized tribe, it's the colonizer that gives you that recognition that grants you that sovereignty, right? So it's a weird mix. So, so I think it's really important, again, from a cultural side, that tribes not fear their genius, not fear their ability to make decisions, recognize where capacity needs to be enhanced. And in my mind, that's how I use sovereignty. That's how I would think about sovereignty. That and I've been talking a lot lately about sovereignty, and I've respelled, if you will, the word sovereignty versus SOV. I put SOLV, right? So it starts with sovereignty. So we start with that thinking that what is it we're trying to solve? And so that's how I think about culture and its importance in it. Because when we start talking about our languages and our uh, traditions and ceremonies, I'm a practitioner in my own tribe, but that's for my tribe, right? That's for my people to know and for them to own, right? And that, to me, I differentiate that from this type of work, but it informs and it guides, what we do in this. So that's how I would look at the importance of culture in sovereignty and ultimately policy setting and decision making in this type of a space.
Okay, thank you. So, what I'd like to ask is maybe looking at some bridging concepts, and Hope, I'm going to also ask you this question. Um, so, we had talked about in the past, Governor, about concepts like duality and finding the balance between, you had mentioned in your introduction, opposing and supporting, but really not looking to kind of set that separation up. We're not engaging, but more to here to learn. And so, in terms of duality, um, Hope, in your work, what, in your opinion, have you seen in terms of finding a balance in the work that you're doing as opposed to maybe some of the challenges that we see in Indian country. And I think it's fair to say that folks working in Indian country can understand that there's definitely some disparities and separations in terms of equity to, say, rest of American society. And if we're trying to find a measure of equity, what are some concepts that maybe we can revisit and maybe change the perspective that would help us build? And this is the second part of this question, Governor. I'll ask you this: finding those relationships to support this duality, if that makes sense. So I'm happy to rephrase if you don't understand.
Okay. Did you want to go first, Hope? Well, I think part of that was.
Sure. I'll touch on a couple things, and then I'm sure you'll have some additional feedback to even some of my comments, hopefully. So what I would say is that this kind of duality concept, Chris, that you're talking about, I think is existent all over the globe right now, right? We know that there's a huge energy demand, and how we as people decide to approach that differs in every community, in every corner of the world. And I think we are all having the same debate, right? And how we feel about it, what it means to ourselves, to our communities, and what we know. So really, from my perspective, I'm an economist. I come from an economics background. So a lot of what I do, I try to have rooted in as much data as possible. So a lot of the work that we do at Idaho National Laboratory and through kind of these other avenues like the Idaho Advanced Energy Consortium, or we have a tech hub designation through the U.S. Department of Commerce as the nuclear tech hub for the country in Idaho and Wyoming, is really trying to root these decisions or the opportunity to make some of these decisions in data-driven opportunities. And so one of the ways that we're doing this with communities, and you'll kind of hear this thread, I think, throughout some of the other panels too, Gain is on and others, is really about providing as much information and context as possible so that communities can make decisions for themselves. And so a lot of the work that we're doing is connecting with tribal nations or rural communities, even highly populous communities, and talking about not just what their energy interests and goals are, but ultimately what they want that community to look like 2, 5, 10, 15 years from now, and helping to build content and information around that, whether that's, locations specifically on where those technologies may or may not go, or simply what kind of economic industrial mix do you want to see in your space, right? Do you want to see more manufacturing or fabrication? Or do you want to see more kind of professional and business type of jobs? What kind of workforce development is interesting to your communities? What do your children want to do? Those types of conversations really inform the ability to do pieces of work like feasibility studies and analyses to inform those kind of ultimately long-term and big investment decisions. So on our side, we work really closely with the Shoshone-Bannock tribes. Shoshone-Bannock tribes in particular are very forward thinking as far as what they would like to see on Fort Hall Reservation, and their interests as far as not just energy, but their economic mix and how they partner really well with the communities around them. Obviously, the Idaho National Lab is a handful of miles from there. And so our partnership is really strong. So we've worked with them over the last year to produce one of these feasibility studies with them, to give them kind of a starting place of, above and beyond what they have, culminated for themselves, to help inform some of these discussions and some of these decisions. Even when you have that huge packet of information about what the technologies are and what it would take to actually get a site permit and all of those things, there's still that, duality thread throughout that entire conversation. And there should be, right? Everyone's perspectives need to be heard and part of that discussion. But ultimately, our goal is that information that we can continue to provide and answer those questions as best we can will help drive the conversation to a finite point where those decisions can be made and those investments are ultimately made, so that, everyone gets to go and head where they would like to go. So I think I'd make one other point before I turn it over. On the relationship side, from our perspective, we wouldn't have an understanding of what the Shoshone-Bannock tribes want or need unless they were willing to partner with us and vice versa. And so it's been a very fruitful relationship, very fruitful discussion, I think, for everyone involved, based on our ability to, we're trying our best to show up. I think everyone involved is trying their best to show up so that we can all benefit from that kind of communal discussion and relationship building. And we're kind of really seeing the fruits of that labor in a lot of ways, not just from the information collection and sharing perspective, but some of the workforce development programming we've been able to build, a lot of the relationships across the universities, and then ultimately bringing in companies to the region or helping start up companies from local entrepreneurs and that kind of thing. That entire ecosystem is really important. And I do think that as many of those relationships that you can build, the better.
Thank you, Hope. So, Governor, do you need me to re-ask the question? I think what I'm really curious is what you see in terms of getting to the relationship component and reconnecting maybe some of our traditional teachings as it relates to solving some of the challenges that Indian countries is working with, and in particular how that applies to, say, nuclear industry and nuclear technology. I think you're on mute, sir.
Sorry about that. One of the things that I want to build on that Hope said was showing up, right? We hear all the time in Indian country, we're on Indian time, usually meaning we're late, right? But I think this is Indian time. This is our time. We got to show up, but we also have to be present. That's part of that duality, right? You can show up, but if you're not present mentally, physically, spiritually, we miss that component. And so I tee it up with that because to that element of getting to the nuclear opportunities and how we pursue those in Indian country and being able to get the nuclear component as a potential solution. One of the things that I think is going to be critical in this is understanding that difference between wants and needs. And what I mean by that, we have this tension between those things, and it's a strange tension, but it's an understandable tension. And what I mean by that is we have all these things like social licensing and license to operate and all this kind of stuff. But in my mind, those are very transactional. We want a new school, we need a new clinic, we need a new whatever. What's the next sparkly thing, right? So that, in my mind, drives these social licensing kind of agreements and so on and so forth. Different from needs, and I think about this in terms of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Your first need is food and clean water and air, land. In many of these instances, the tribal leaders are the negotiators. In many instances, tribal leaders want to get reelected. It's easier to sell a sparkly school or a sparkly clinic than it is clean air. But clean air and clean water and a healthy environment, that's really where the value is. It'll appreciate and value on your balance sheet. Whereas a facility, in many cases, is gonna depreciate. But we chase income versus asset. So in a cultural framework, the cultural element is the asset. And so that's where we need to build that bridge. Because if we can get industry to understand that, what the need is coming from the community voice, then it helps us to better understand how we build these relationships. But it's not limited to industry, it's also back to community. One of the big challenges in many communities, and I'll say, about our community, when you say uranium, everybody freaks out, right? But part of the challenge is that our people don't have the advantage of access to the science, to the education in that space. And I've always said uranium's not the problem, it's the symptom. The problem is the flawed decision-making system that we don't control. So it gets back to that tension between wants and needs. Culture will influence the need, the asset. Income will influence this other side. You need both of them, and I'm not trying to um, dilute either one. You need both. But the tension to your question will have to be addressed.
Mhm.
That's the path to getting to nuclear solutions. That's the path to getting to community advancement or community development. And it's the path that also elevates us from moving out of economic development into economic integration. It's an integrated approach. Economic development is programmatic. Economic integration is nation building. Integration focuses on your assets. Economic development focuses on your income. So it's a complex question you have, right? To
Yeah.
get to where.
Yes.
And so that's how I would respond to it. And that's how I see culture again coming in from a different perspective on the assets side.
So I want to also just note that we have some questions, but before we get to that, I had two more points, and I'm going to more or less summarize. So we talked about the foundations of sovereignty and what sovereignty is, how culture ties into that, identified what duality is, and then looked at some relationships efforts. And then Hope, you had mentioned some abilities of incorporating into the communities, and an example with Shoshone Bannock. And then the last point I wanted to share was these partnerships. Maybe that's where you were working towards, Governor, in terms of, creating partnerships with non-tribal, non-Indian, especially in terms of businesses and industries, the opportunity, the support, and then and the future developments that may occur as tribes have become more educated, and therefore really helping these interests align their development with, say, the foundations of a tribe and communities priorities, these cultural and traditional priorities, which is the core to their sovereignty. And if we can get to that point, I think, is it fair to say that we can see some progression in terms of, building this relationship, building the transparency, rebuilding the trust, and then getting then to these next components of, instead of development, but now working to help try integrate its economies in a way that it's building their nation. So is that a fair statement to say? And I'll just really quickly, short answer, Hope, and Dr. Luarkie, if you can just answer that last point. Hope, we'll start with you.
Um, yeah, I think that's a completely fair point. I think uh, this conversation is very complicated, right? And so these panels are hopefully helpful and informative and can create connection. But I think to Dr. Larky's point earlier this morning, every single one of these communities and tribal nations has to approach this differently, and however that works for them. But the goal is that more of these conversations we have, the more folks that you can interact with in this space to learn more of where to make those connections or get some of that information, or potentially hear from a company that is actually of interest, that technology is of interest to that tribal nation or to that community, et cetera, sparks that next set of conversations and questions amongst the leadership, among community members. So I think totally fair, Chris, and hopefully these conversations continue to help drive that forward.
Thank you. Final thoughts, Governor?
Yeah, again, just piggybacking on Hope's perspective here, and on the relationships piece. Relationships are so critical, as you mentioned, with industry, community, with the tribes, and so on and so forth. But we always have to remember there's a relationship with the land. There's a relationship with the mineral. The land, the minerals aren't waiting for extraction, they're waiting for a relationship, right? And I think that is one thing we always forget about. We need to have that relationship because then it helps us again. That's the cultural part again, right? Coming in. That's what I call indigenous knowledge, not traditional knowledge, indigenous, just knowledge, right? That's part of the problem in this whole space. And I don't think it's unique to nuclear. I think it's whether it's extraction, whether it's even with, in some instances, clean energy. We've forgotten about the relationships. The problem isn't the technology or the minerals or whatever, it's the relationships that we've dismantled. So I think we need to reconnect on relationships. And once we can do that, those partnerships become stronger. They give us the opportunity now to have these deeper discussions on solution. So I think nuclear is perfectly aligned for this reestablishing because again, I mentioned uranium and how everybody freaks out on that. But uranium, like anything else, uranium doesn't have the ability to cure and it doesn't have the ability to kill. That's a human decision. What's our relationship with it, right? So that's how I would respond to your question, and I think the partnerships are going to be inspired and informed by the relationships we create with everything that's in the ground, on the ground, around the ground, and we need to remember that we're not here to just take from the earth. We also have to be reminded what we give back to it.
Thank you. So we do have time for a question, and I'll turn to Eleanor to present the question, and then for us, we can answer the question. So Eleanor, please.
Hi, thank you, Chris, and thank you for your questions. I believe the first one was from Riley Fisher. So it reads, question to the panel, and thank you very much for these great perspectives so far. I'm very curious about Terras and Tito's as they were created in the 2005 Indian Tribal Energy Self-Determination Act. So far, only one tribe, Red Lake, has engaged in a Tito, and none have engaged in a Terra. The language in the CFR explicitly mentions uranium and nuclear development as eligible for Terras/Titos. What is your perspective on these regulatory mechanisms as they stand, and do you see any use of them going forward, particularly in the nuclear space?
So if I may, I can take the first part of this. Little background, in 2000, the Intertribal Energy Network, which is a loose affiliation of intertribals back then, worked under a legislative draft, a bill that they deemed Tribal Energy Self-Sufficiency Act. It was called TESSA. And TESSA basically morphed and after a few years merged into what became the Energy Policy Act of 2005. In 2005, that became the provisions that we know today as TERRA, Tribal Energy Resource Agreements. And simply put, it was a mechanism that tribes advocated for complete control of their permitting, their approval authorities, and it ran into some challenges, mainly in terms of two main areas that I can remember. One was the environmental challenges under, say, NEPA or a TIPA, Tribal Environmental Protection Act consideration and what that meant in terms of who could challenge, say, a tribal permitting process, number one. Number two was a little more significant because tribes have this fundamental relationship in terms of trust responsibility. And at the time, the federal government said, if you choose a Terra, you have to prove that you have the ability to take on all this authority, that you can oversee it, that you can, manage this delegated authority. What comes with that was the relinquishment of the federal obligations or the federal responsibility. And that really put a chilling effect on tribes because now what the feds were saying is if the tribe is asking for all this power and authority and wants to unilaterally make these decisions on its behalf using its sovereignty, then it makes sense that the liabilities would stay with the tribe as well. And when that came out, the tribes were slow and we're saying, well, maybe that's not as far as we want to go. And so I think that is one of the reasons why the Terra was never really taken. And since then, there have been a number of provisions to change and affect, maybe carve out some lesser form of that, but still maintain this federal trust responsibility. Now, there are two thoughts on that. One, you could say, if you really want sovereignty, then it makes sense that we'd go and relinquish this authority or this obligation that you would hold on the feds. The other is folks want to say, well, there's always this obligation for a number of reasons that establish that trust response. So it's been a debate back and forth throughout Indian country. On a TIDO, Tribal Energy Development Organization, that's a DOE construct, I believe. And under that organization, really, I think it's more administrative in terms of applying for grants. And there are probably some improvements. And I know there's a long answer, but basically, I would argue that that has been recent, especially under the Bill and IRA bills that came out after COVID in terms of funding opportunity. But it really speaks to what is the joint venture or the relationship between structures that are partnering with tribes and applying for federal grants. That model hasn't really been tested in a lot of ways. And so I think it's just a new concept that tribes are coming to. I think it could have matured under Bill and Ira, but under the current administration, they eliminated sources of funding. So maybe those opportunities have either died or slowed down in terms of pursuing a TIDO. I'll stop there and see if perhaps Dr. Luarkie or Hope, if you have any thoughts or comments to that.
I would add to it, this summer, the Bureau of Indian Affairs and Department of Interior hosted a Indian Energy Conference up in Lakewood, Colorado, and this was a very specific a panel, as a matter of fact, on this, on TIDOs and TERRAs, on tribal energy resource agreements and tribal energy development organizations. One of the questions that was asked, and Red Lake was specifically pointed out as being the only tribe having one. So one of the questions that was asked to the audience, and there was probably 300 people there at this conference. The question that was asked is, all of you tribes that are here, would you apply for a TIDO or a TERRA? No hands went up. And the reason being is it at the end of the day, it's really it's kind of like the Hearth Act. It gives you authorization to enter into leases and those kind of things without having to go to the federal government and say, Mother, may I? But to get there, you have to submit 3 years of clean audits. You have to submit all this kind of stuff, your firstborn and everything else, right? And the tribes are saying, why would I do that? And I have to report and I have to do all this kind of stuff here when I'm only getting this much out of it. It's classic government. It's designed for the government, not for the user. I think that's the problem. People don't use it. And we even looked at it at my own tribe when I was serving in leadership. It's the intent is awesome. like I said, it's similar to the Hearth Act, but to get there is onerous. That's why I think that's what turns tribes off.
And Hope, is there any comments that you want to share to this end?
Nothing that hasn't already been covered.
Okay. And I think I will just add, in terms of the perspective, regulatory mechanisms as they stand, do you see any of them going forward, especially nuclear? The answer is yes, provided you can clear the hurdles that Luarkie talked about initially, and then you also address these other kind of challenge or appeal processes, that is the environmental component of, say, tariff, for example, and or then finally on the back end, on a project that goes south, does a tribe then say, look, we want the federal government to basically cover us in terms of its obligation, trust, responsibility? You put all those together, it just makes it really hard for a tribe to really consider those current laws as mechanisms. All right.
Chris, before we leave that just shortly, and to add to your answer as well, that how do we see this going forward? I think these could be incredible tools for nuclear and all these other areas. But to your point, we have to take away all the the the, the stickers and the needles and everything to get there. It could be a really cool tool, and I think this would be a great way to exercise sovereignty because it definitely puts the tribe in charge.
Yes. Okay, so Eleanor, I think we're at our time.
We
Let
actually
me,
have a little bit more time, and there is one more question.
okay.
Before we conclude this panel, I just wanted to get to this one. The question is, what are your thoughts on the current administration's push for mining critical minerals? And do you think they all still hold the belief that all tribes think the same about the extraction of those resources from their lands? And this is in the Q&A box in case anyone wants to read it.
Okay, let me look. So I will start two parts of that question. The first part, um, not all tribes are the same. So that to me is an easy answer. They're all different, and each tribe is unique. So part of non-tribal outside entities coming to Indian country is really doing the diligence in establishing the relationship, building trust with key members of the tribe and or the leadership, and then continual presence to maintain not only transparency but also education if you're looking for a project going forward. And again, each is unique and different. The first part of that question, the current administration, I don't see the question. Can you repeat that question for me?
Yes. It says, what are your thoughts on the current administration's push for mining critical minerals? And do you think they all still hold the belief that all tribes think the same about the extraction of those resources from their lands?
So in terms of the first question, so I've always advocated this simple statement, especially I'm from Navajo and I grew up in a time where we had a lot of coal development, coal-fired plants. And in my work, I've always shared that, tribes are looking to help support solutions not only to their problems but regions and or to a larger extent, support the economic uh, industries that are based out of and utilize tribal resources. And this statement is um, looking for a balanced and responsible energy portfolio, right? So that means looking to find solutions that respect our natural and trust assets, our sovereign resources, but also integrating technology and industries and tribes being responsible stewards of those resources, being able to formulate the ability to solve these energy problems. And sometimes that might include technologies and industries like nuclear, coal, oil, and gas. And so that balance of finding a balance and responsible energy portfolio, I think, is something that I've seen and was well received, regardless of the administration. Dr. Luarkie?
Yeah, I guess my thoughts on that are, even if that's the wish of the current administration to push mining or new mining for critical minerals, we've seen what has happened at, with the Resolution Copper in Arizona. It's 30 years plus and just to get the permit. So our permitting system is so antiquated and flawed with challenge that it's going to take a while, right? There's been some mines that have been approved, recently, but those again have been in the works for a long time. Where I would go on this question is, um, I believe that versus new mining, because our tribe, again, coming from a mining tribe, we have zero interest in new mining, but we have a ton of interest in cleanup. We have millions and millions of tons of tailings of uranium. To me, that's the faster path. The economics and all those kind of things behind it have to be done, of course, but I think that it's really, really important that we look at cleanup because in order to have a clean energy future, we have to clean up the past. We can't just leave it. And that's not just, I don't mean just the mining tailings and those kind of things. We have to clean up, give the opportunity to get people healthy again, the land to get healthy again. That's part of that whole cleanup. It's a holistic cleanup, not just the mineral. So I think that question though, specific to the critical mineral cleanup is the better way. And I shared with there's a link to a really cool paper that was written at the Colorado School of Mines on waste to value models. And then lastly, again, just echoing what Chris said, in his comments, all tribes don't think the same. There's some tribes that are going to buckle down and not want to hear this conversation at all. And then you're going to have the other side of tribes saying, well, we're really interested. Can you tell us more? Right. So I think they span the spectrum. And we do know there are tribes talking to this administration about this kind of work. So I think I'm sure they've gotten the answer by now, that all tribes don't think the same.
Hope, do you have a comment?
I would just maybe offer that the any administration thinking about critical minerals and materials, I think ultimately should or does come back to a national security discussion, right? If we need those things for whatever decision we have made as a nation, or a series of groups of people together, and we need those materials, how do we get them where we're still thinking about ourselves from a national security and safety perspective? And so we all know kind of where we're at on the uranium front in particular, as far as where we have historically gotten those materials from, and whether or not we want to continue to bring in materials from other nations, whether we think they're allied or enemy nations. And so how each administration chooses to do that does differ. I do think that that's a main part of this discussion is what is the most secure way of moving forward in energy, delivering the energy needs that we have, while also being thoughtful to national security concerns. There's not a right answer here. I think that there's a lot of wrong answers, and we're all working towards what that combination of right answers is. I think to Dr. Luarkie's point, there's a lot of opportunity in that cleanup space. In the last handful of years, we've seen a lot of new companies pop up across the country that are specifically looking at mines that have been around for a long time and weren't properly closed, weren't properly managed. And so there's a lot of new technology and new opportunity to do that, right? Leave the land better than was left before, and do some of that critical material work, if that's the direction that we choose to go. I'm pleased to see there are some more innovative, efficient companies popping up across the country who are thinking about that specifically. And I think that's certainly something that we should be exploring.
Chris,
Thank you.
If I could add just one thing, just FYI, on the mining question, next May 2026, and look for a save the date will be coming out. The Pueblo of Laguna has partnered with the Colorado School of Mines, and they'll be hosting the 2026 Native American Mining and Energy Sovereignty Conference. As a part of that conference, they'll be given a tour of the Jack Powell uranium mine. So you'll be able to see a a mine that's been closed for years and the challenges that remain, and the discussions that will happen. So I just wanted to put that out there just to get in your mental notebooks.
Okay. So I think we had a very productive and informative session, and I want to thank Hope and Dr. Luarkie for joining us. And I'm sorry that Elena was not able to join us. I know she has tons and tons of experience and valuable information to share. So perhaps next time. So I want to now turn over to Scott and Native Nuclear for panel number 2. Again, thank you all.
Well, thank you very much, Chris. I have to say that the first panel, I think I've learned a lot. I really appreciate what the panel had to say. First of all, my name is Scott Lathrop. I'm the founder and chief executive officer of Native Nuclear. And it's a brand new nonprofit that we established just the beginning of this year. It's kind of a spin-off of our work that we did with the Department of Energy in reference to the collaborative base siting of used fuel. What we want to talk about a little bit today relates to considerations for project development and pathways to permitting. And this panel that we'll be discussing practical pathways to projects, implementation, from feasibility studies, workforce planning, to navigating permit, intergovernmental coordination, And what we hope as we have this discussion today is that it's pretty much going to be kind of an open discussion, more of a fireside chat, hopefully looking at some practical things that we can do as it relates to different projects that may be coming down the road. I kind of see projects in the nuclear space kind of in 2 categories. One, projects that are essentially initiated by states for the need of public utility support. And then because there's opportunities for tribal nations, I think it's important to talk a little bit about how tribal nations should actually look at projects that may be happening on their own ancestral lands or their lands that they actually control. So today's panel, we have 3 people. I think it's going to be a great discussion. A little later, I'll ask each of them to introduce themselves, but we have Chris Stearns with Washington State Representative, Jennifer Cash, Capital Energy Advocacy, and Marissa Bell, Department of Energy and Office of Nuclear Energy. So before we kind of go through and ask a few questions and start the discussion, I was hoping maybe, Chris, you could start off and introduce yourself, give us a little bit of information about your background and kind of like maybe a passion, why you're involved.
Thank you so much, Scott. I'm just so impressed by everything I've learned so far, just even today. So my background is that I'm Navajo. I serve in the Washington State Legislature. My district is just south of Seattle, so sort of suburban Seattle. I serve as the Speaker Pro Tem of the House, which means I sort of manage the House floor while we're debating and voting on bills. My background is I was the first ever director of Native American Affairs for the United States Department of Energy. And prior to that, I had been the Democratic counsel for the Committee on Natural Resources in the House of Representatives, where I did a lot of work for a congressman and then eventually energy secretary named Bill Richardson. So my sort of experience was born out of a lot of work in northern New Mexico around Los Alamos around Sandia, and then of course the infamous Whip bypass route. But obviously there are a lot of tribes that were affected by our programs at the lab. And then we also did a lot of work on studying new technology to help bring energy to tribes. I spent a lot of time on concentrating solar power, but I also was introduced to our National Ignition Facility, which was still starting construction at the time. So I've kind of embraced new technology, and I just see such potential for tribal energy sovereignty through advanced forms of energy technology, and that's my passion.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Jennifer, maybe you can kind of introduce yourself and give us some information about your background.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for this opportunity. This is really cool. I am Jen Cash. I was raised in Washington State in Wenatchee, worked in DC. So I'm based out of Virginia for 3 different Washington State members throughout my career, most recently for Kim Schreier as her legislative director, handling energy policy, was there during reconciliation, handled tribal issues my whole career in Washington State. We have 29 federally recognized tribes. So learning about the history. Denny Hack was one of my first bosses on the Hill and really helped me learn about, the deep history in the Pacific Northwest and really imbued an appreciation. And so, one of my favorite issues, not issues, but one of my favorite energy tribal nexus issues is really just interesting and fascinating. So really enjoy the opportunity. So now currently I'm with Washington State. So trying to kind of connect the dots between what's happening in the DC side of things with what is happening stateside. And there's just lots of exciting things happening in the nuclear space. So that's kind of who I am.
Great. Thank you very much. Marissa.
Hello, everyone. I'm Marissa Bell. It's an honor to be invited to participate on the panel and to be here and to hear the discussions. It's been very fruitful so far. So I'm with the U.S. Department of Energy with the Office of Nuclear Energy. And within that, I'm within the Office of Collaboration-Based Siting. And our mission is to site a consolidated storage facility for commercial spent nuclear fuel. So that's the space that I engage in. So in that role, I wear a couple different hats. I support the team by managing siting strategy. I also run the collaboration-based siting consortia program that Scott Lathrop is a part of. Along with, I've been with the program for 3 years, and during that time, I've been supporting tribal engagement and also overseeing the management of knowledge management as well as social science. My background is, so I came from academia, and originally, so I'm currently situated in Western New York, but I don't know if the accent comes through, but I'm originally from the UK. I've been here for 12 years though, and call this home. And my background is in geography. So I got my PhD from the University at Buffalo in geography and did my undergraduate degrees in geography. And so just resonating with some of the aspects from the first panel, geography is primarily about an appreciation of place and space and people's relationships to place and space. So it's from that perspective I bring to my role. I've been studying various issues, but predominantly in my prior role, from academic perspective, looking at community engagement, stakeholder engagement, understanding community focused decision making. And so I bring that to collaboration based siting. Maybe I'll leave it there, but I'm very much looking forward to this conversation.
Well, thank you very much. I was thinking before we move on, you probably need to know a little bit more about myself. I should tell you that I'm a member of the Yaktichu Tichu Yaktilhini tribe in San Luis Obispo, California. The picture behind there, you'll see a Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant. Our tribe, myself, we've had kind of a unique relationship with the plant. It's been in our homeland for going about 40 years now. In fact, the plant is built on one of our ancestral village sites. And the earlier panel, we can really identify with the issue of our stewardship responsibility of land, water, and air. And we believe the same is that everything starts there. It's that relationship that we have with the land that's important as we go forward. So with that, maybe we can get maybe into the discussion a little bit. As I mentioned earlier, I really do see on the horizon that there's a real push for nuclear energy projects throughout the nation. If you've been reading the news, there's a lot of information there. And sometimes that leaves communities behind, or it brings up a gigantic question of how we all engage. So for anyone on the panel, I hope everyone would just might want to weigh in on this. The first question is intergovernmental coordination among federal, state, utilities, and tribes is a critical and required thoughtful and meaningful consultation requirement. Could you share any insights on how building relations that align communities over a multi-year construction and operation period? So I'm just opening it up to the panel members. If you have any thoughts on how, any insights on building those relationships.
I'll kick it off because I have it was fresh in my mind. It's the hardest thing I've had to do professionally and didn't even get it across the finish line. But our about last year, NSF, National Science Foundation, offered a $160 million innovation award, and it was place-based. You could pick any topic you wanted. We took a note from our friend Hope Morrow, who developed an advanced ecosystem between 3 states, include Idaho. So our idea about a year later through NSF was, okay, let's figure out what this could look like potentially between Washington State and Idaho. And the idea is bring everybody together, give everybody a role, celebrate success. It was incredibly difficult. We managed to get through there, through the application process. We got to the final round, but it was very eye-opening and but rewarding because relationship, the old saying, relationship moves at the speed of trust. But it was building the dynamics between stakeholders, learning from each other, learning about issues that you didn't even realize were issues, trying to identify mutual wins, compromise, coming together. One of the, maybe I should save it for later, but one of the things I've been thinking about more too, and part of it was community benefits of it. Okay, how do you align? What kind of benefits do you bring to these communities? Cal Forward, I'll put it in the chat actually. Cal Forward and one of the labs in California, I love this. It's a public database of different types of energy projects. There is a tribe function. I don't know how many projects they actually have in there, but here's this project here, and these were the workforce benefits. This is what the community saw. I think as we kind of enter into this new era where we have different entities developing these massive energy projects, I think it's more incumbent upon folks and policymakers everywhere to ensure this is what a good deal, this is what a good, this is what this looks like in its peak form. So anyway.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else have any thoughts about?
I'll mention that a couple of years ago, I got involved in supporting an advanced nuclear project in our state. There is a commercial nuclear power plant, the Columbia Generating Station, which is along the Columbia River in sort of the south central part of the state. It's technically on the Hanford Nuclear Reservation. And the operator of the plant, Energy Northwest, was very interested in moving into the small modular SMR space. And so they asked us if the state would be willing to sponsor or fund a feasibility study. And so I secured $25 million to get that started. And so as that moved forward through our budget process, we became very aware of tribal concerns about the project. And so as we worked with them to sort of get a better understanding of what it is that they wanted out of it, and also what we could do, we did come right to the head of how consultation should work. So I amended the budget proviso to make sure that our state began consultation with the tribes before the money could even go out to the project. So, and I think one of the things we've learned over the last year or so since that has started is that tribes, they feel like they've been left out of things. And so what they've expressed is that they want project developers, and especially states and the federal government, to be invested in the tribe's future. So, we took a trip to look at some other states and tribes that have great relationships with the energy department and the nearby labs. And that's just a repeated theme that we saw, was that the labs and the local agencies made investments in tribal science and tribal careers and tribal governance. And I think that's really important for all of these projects as they move forward. And back in Washington State, so far the tribes have let us know that they haven't really been able to participate in ownership or equity of new energy. They haven't really been able to participate in terms of getting revenue out of these projects. And then lastly, they haven't been able to participate in terms of actually getting power or molecules out of the project. So that is that's our starting line. And as we go forward, whether it is advanced nuclear, which also includes fusion, hydrogen, you name it, those are the things that we're going to pay special attention to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. Thank you. Marissa, you have any thoughts?
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to share, especially from the perspective of DOE and the Office of Collaboration-Based Siting. So, and I think parts of this, echoes and builds on things that were just mentioned, as well as in the previous session, because I think, so not only like building relationships and engaging are really at the core of collaboration-based siting. And so, and I do want to give some credit in terms of the insights that I would be providing. These come from, our excellent collaboration-based siting consortia, for example, some of the lessons that you've been learning over the past couple of years. And just for context, so DOE in 2023 released a funding opportunity with $24 million to institutions, academic institutions, NGOs, and so Scott Lathrop and others on this call, I saw a couple other folks on this call, have been integral to figuring out ways to innovate engagement through multiple mechanisms. So I think that one of the key, and this has been mentioned on the call, but I think it's important to reemphasize, the importance of that to DOE, and that is that each of these relationships is unique. And so we don't sort of treat tribal engagement as one monolith, but each relationship is unique, and those relationships have to be fostered individually. And so for tribal engagement, the starting point is recognition of sovereignty and rights that we have to respect. But then each tribe has their own governance system, structure, culture, ways of making decisions that we have to essentially start the relationship by listening in order to understand. And then, of course, it's two ways. So providing information and being transparent and as open as we can. It is challenging when administrations change and directions change, but being right there and sort of being present to say, this is what we know right now. And, I'm happy to share what we know when we know it. But that's sort of the willingness to sort of be accessible and be available and provide that information, and meeting folks where they're at, meeting communities where they're at. Different communities and different tribal nations have different levels of sort of understanding and relationships to the issues that we're dealing with, and so we need to sort of tailor information and education in ways that support capacity. In order to support those relationships and consultation, we also need to give resources to build capacity. And so we've been doing that through various funding opportunities, and we hope to, and we will be continuing that in various different mechanisms, which I may talk about a little bit later on. And I will also just echo an earlier comment about sort of showing up and being present, and the importance of like in person and face to face. And so we all appreciate being able to engage in virtual formats, and that increases accessibility in some ways, but sometimes you just have to be there, and so we're pushing for to be able to do that type of comprehensive engagement, and to set up the context where tribes would like to formally consult with us. So those are a couple of the sort of starting insights.
Thank you. Chris, it looks like your hand's up. You have a comment or question.
Yeah, I think something Marissa said just really, struck me as just being so important, and that's showing up. My colleague from the Tri-Cities, Representative Barnard, she organized a tribal visit, and so we had two tribes that were from right around that area, and we're like actually on the site where the SMR project would happen, on the banks of the Columbia River. And the tribal representatives, including their cultural staff, they pointed out right on the river, there are these islands, and they talked about this is where we would come to camp. And the next tribe would say, yeah, and we did too. We were there. This is, we've been here for 3,000, 5,000 years on this particular island. And that just had such an impact, I think, on everyone else who was on that tour, which you would never get on Zoom. And so it is really powerful to show up in person.
Thank you. Thank you for that comment. Kind of moving into the next little discussion item here. I keep thinking about our past work engaging tribal communities in the last 2 years or so. And I think there's a couple of things that are coming about relating to trust building, and also being able to discuss honestly about, I want to say, environmental impacts, and also potentially talking about community benefits. And so I'm wondering if you guys could just share a little information about maybe past dealings as far as building those community relations, any suggestions or ideas, and the importance of actually educating the community, engaging the community, especially tribal communities, about the environmental impacts. All energy development programs will have environmental impacts, and tribal people in general, definitely, I always say we're the ultimate environmentalists, and we are totally connected to the again, we say land, sky, and water, that kind of thing. And so I was wondering if you could just share some information about those areas and what we can do better as far as making those things happen.
I'll go first. It's time consuming hard work, and when you're trying to pull together a project or a proposal together, you got to fight the urge to rule with an iron fist, and you need to show up. And in terms of, just echoing other thoughts, previously, tribes are not a monolith. And tribes, something I've always encouraged, my staff, they're not stakeholders either. These are government to government, relationships, status, that nation to nation diplomacy almost. Like, so you don't just reach out to the chairman as a young staffer. No. Like, so that's kind of, there are, sorry, the dog's just barking his mind out outside. But and then just building trust does take years sometimes. Who are the trusted colleagues? How do you, first impressions, come in the appropriate, respectful manner. It's great that we have protocols in place. I'm wearing my state government hat for a second, but our liaisons and reps are only as good as the protocols, or as long as we coordinate. It's great that we have these things, but we need to use them effectively and coordinate. And also, this is, if it's certainly on the land, it's their land, and tribal councils operate at different timelines, and it may not align with corporate timelines, and that's just the reality of the matter. And just, I don't know, that's a few thoughts.
Yes, it's sort of like we definitely have to have that additional effort to engage. Engaging with tribal communities is definitely about building relation first, in order you can build a trust before you can actually talk about projects. So any other thoughts with those three items, talking about trust building, talking about environmental impacts, and something that's probably not talked a lot of is the issue of community benefit from whatever project that goes forward. So maybe you can address a few of those items.
I would say that I don't know, a month or two ago, I had the privilege of sitting next to Jen at the National Governors Association Nuclear Summit that we had in our state capital in Olympia. And so she was facilitating a panel on community involvement. So there are all kinds of stakeholders. You name it, they were there from around the country. And the discussion kept on coming back to that exact question. How do you work with tribes? What do they want? Who are they? And I think the realization came over people that, tribes are their governments. And so, if you were to ask, well, what does the state of West Virginia want? Or what does Florida want? It's not a very simple answer. It's a very complex question. And if we approach things like, here, you're going to get power, I mean, that's actually not a good approach. In fact, it's really not a good approach to just say, here's what you're going to get. That is actually the worst thing you can do. I remember actually having this discussion with some people in the industry who wanted to talk to a tribe. And I said, do not, under any circumstance, walk into the council or the staff and tell them what a wonderful thing you are about to deliver and why it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. No, what your job is to walk in that room and ask them, we would love to hear about your history and culture, and then shut up for the next 45 minutes and let the tribe talk. And then maybe you can talk about your gizmo. Because once you understand who they are, then you kind of get a sense of, wow. So, they want better public safety. They want better communication technology. They want better roads. And, I think for us as government, we're probably better when we operate on that level. It's more diplomatic. When I was at DOE and I would come out to Richland for the Hanford cleanup, and we started having that kind of discussion with a local tribe. And what they said was, actually what we want is we want to be able to better protect our people. Next thing I know, I'm delivering a fire engine to this tribe. But that made them a stronger government. That's what they want. And if we just go and say, here's what we're going to give you, we're missing everything. We are not listening. So being good listeners is essential for us.
Yeah, and definitely I agree 100% of everything you're saying. It's all about listening, doing a lot of listening. And it seems like our Westernly approach doesn't really fit that model because we're always in a hurry. We want to present that great plan, and we don't understand why you don't like it. And so, yeah, that I think that is really good information and advice. Um, and kind of moving on a little bit. We have several different tribal nations and several different states, and everybody has their own permitting framework and certain hoops that you have to go through. And lots of times the framework or the procedure, the process, whatever has been set up are kind of roadblocks or barriers for tribal communities for many reasons. Maybe there's a lack of capacity for the group to engage. And so I'm just kind of wondering, as far as in your past dealings, and how can we maybe knock down some of these barriers to make it a little bit easier for tribal groups to be involved with the whole permitting process? Go for it.
Okay. I was actually, I would like to see, I mean, Tara, obviously it's burdensome and clearly it's not effective. There's a conversation going on right now where we may or may not have permit reform. I'd love to see some provisions in there that could strengthen and make it easier for tribes to explore energy development. I think that would be very interesting and well received if worded right. And then in terms of the state, I'd like to see more state technical assistant. I'd like to see the states kind of step up a bit and we I think sometimes it's hard to know where to start. It's hard. You get tribes get a lot of ad hoc requests, like people bugging on project. It would be. I think there should be better processes and opportunities just to make it easier in terms of technical assistance. This is the person. And it's sometimes confusing. I would say it's confusing to me to know like who to go, and you're trying to figure. It's a lot. We're kind of requesting of tribes to figure out on their own when they have the other priorities. So how do we make it easier? What do you think, Chris? Sorry, I'm taking Scott's job.
No, you're fine. This is a conversation.
It's very much an evolving conversation. There is I'm just talking from the government perspective. We are built to work slowly. That is, we sometimes we get hard questions and hard issues, and you don't really want snap judgments out of your government. But other times when there is this, generally consensus, then, we kind of move slower than people would like. I think in terms of sort of advanced nuclear, that is, you just see that more than ever. I mean, there are still people who are not convinced, say, about the science, or they're not sure because they haven't seen it. I mean, none of us have really, what the actual operation will do. So there is sort of a gratefulness for the slowness of the process, but at the same time, you're dealing with a field where it is highly capital intensive. And if things are delayed needlessly, that really hurts the entire industry. And the reason I support advanced nuclear is because I believe the technology will bring incredible benefits to our society as a whole. So we're struggling to figure out how do we fit things that are science-based but include what are the effects on the environment. What are the safety effects? I mean, basically everything the NRC looks at license-wise. We have those same issues. But if we're going to look, one thing is that if we're going to look at the same exact issue in our state regulatory body, does that need to necessarily be sequential in time, or can we also examine it at the same time that the feds are looking at, and thus, compress the amount of time required to get permits out. That is something that's definitely worth, we're taking a hard look at that.
Yeah. Well, what? Go ahead, Marissa.
I was just going to build on something that Representative Stearns mentioned, and this is kind of the tension of time, the sort of the needs. There's DOE was supposed to pick up the spent nuclear fuel in the 90s, and so there's almost this urgency, and it's currently sitting across the United States at reactor sites and things like that. So there definitely is an urgency, but at the same time, the process, we've heard on this call, has to go at the speed of trust. But it was interesting, that governments are built to work slowly, and so you've got the tensions of trying to get lots done in a little bit of time, but perhaps that structure and that existing system could be leveraged to do this at a pace which is, I would say, accommodating to communities and their needs. One thing in terms of the sort of various, instead of putting all of the burden on a tribe to figure out various permitting at various levels, there are things that DOE can do. And, we are taking a broad approach to engagement in terms of engaging both with, not both, but with multiple actors at state level, at local level, local governments, local communities, and therefore there are some, we can't create relationships, but we can facilitate and support them so that when it comes to knowing what are the requirements, we can try to sort of facilitate those types of relationships where that information can flow more easily. And I think that's one potential starting point.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Before we kind of move on a little bit, we're getting close to our time here. I just wanted to highlight one thing in this topic as far as capacity building of the tribe. I know that with our tribal group, we have limited resources to actually have people in the room to have those consultations. And it seems like everyone from the state, or I want to say industry, that want to have our input, or they feel that they need to create that relation. Everyone in the room is always there on their clock and they're getting paid, but everybody on our side is there on a volunteer basis and trying to carve out time from other sources. So the point is that it's really a capacity building of the tribe is really important. When you take a look at projects, project development, people spend a lot of money on engineers, research, and reports, but there isn't any line item in the budget for tribal engagement. And so that's something that maybe going forward, both state and industry can kind of keep that in mind, simply because there's all different sizes of tribal groups out there with all kinds of different capacities. Before we kind of wind up the little bit of discussion, I wanted to give Marissa a little bit of an opportunity to share a little bit about used fuel storage and what's happening out there and how possibly programs going forward might be able to benefit tribal communities. And it'll also kind of segue into our next section talking about opportunities. So Marissa, maybe you can tell us a little bit about what's happening at the federal level in that area.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it might also build on your discussion of capacity, which I think is incredibly, incredibly important. So where we're at right now, so as I mentioned before, our program is collaboration-based siting for the siting of consolidated storage facilities. We are gearing up to release an expression of interest. So what we've been doing up until now has been a planning and capacity building phase for us, but also through that consortia program that I mentioned, providing funding to institutions to support community capacity building, and there has been a tribal component to that. I will say in that process, we identified a need for additional funding for tribal capacity, so we developed a tribal collaboration initiative in order to solely focus on tribal nations. And so as we start to sort of wrap up the planning and capacity building, we enter the next phase of siting. So yes, we're going to release an expression of interest for consolidated storage facility. It also may be combined with reprocessing and recycling, a public-private partnership. And in that process, so once we release that expression of interest, and then communities will raise their hand. It could be also a tribal nation that raises their hand, or various levels of government entities. But we plan to also release resources and funding in order to essentially, in those specific either nations or specific geographies, in a way, communities, to be able to essentially develop capacity, but figure out whether this is a right fit. So it's more expressing interest in learning more about whether this type of facility would fit their community. And so essentially, there are some restrictions on applying. For example, federally funded research facilities can't apply, but a tribal nation could certainly apply or could partner with other local governments or another tribe in order to apply for this. And through that process as well, it'll be identifying whether that's a good fit for that particular community. What are the goals and visions of that community, the cultural values? Is this a good fit? And I mean, speaking to the question of sort of benefits, and I know there was an earlier question that in terms of community benefit agreements. So in the next stage of this process, after the expression of interest goes out, but we'll start to think about the hosting agreement. And so developing capacity for that entity to identify what can be negotiated, what types of benefits. So it's less of that approach of here are the things that we're offering to you, and more of the approach of looking to tribal nation or local government, state government, what is it that you would like from us, and then work through and develop what a hosting agreement might look like in a future stage of the process.
Great. Well, thank you very much for that information. It looks like we're pretty much at the end of our time. I think Samantha probably has a few questions that she has received out of the chat for all of us. So go for it, Samantha.
Yeah, just a reminder to leave any audience questions that you guys have in the Q&A tab. But just to start off, I want to ask, how can tribal nations build or strengthen workforce development pipelines to ensure that community members are prepared for long-term roles in advanced energy or nuclear projects? And I'll put this in the chat for your reference.
I'll just very quickly say that, you know, in Washington, we have 29 tribes, and you know, infrastructure technology is just such a huge part of our state's economy. You know, Boeing, Amazon, you name it, they're here. So we paid special attention. In fact, I sponsored a bill which was signed into law last year to create a tribal apprenticeship assistance program. So, you know, whatever we can do to help tribal members get into, you know, work as electricians, as pipe fitters, you know, those are all directly related to the build out of our nuclear fleet and anything else, whether it's hydrogen or fusion. But those are our opportunities that I think it's our responsibility to work with the tribes to create those, because we haven't done that in the past. And even basic things, just like, you know, expanding our STEM education opportunities and funding for tribes is so important in this field.
Yeah, I would also add to that that it's important for the industry, government, to get it out to the next generation. We're talking about the high school and college kids to just share what's on the horizon, share the different career pathways that are going to be available 5 to 10 years down the road. We need to speak to the students that are in school right now. The nuclear industry is going to have a gigantic need for workers. And so definitely it's an area that we need to spend more time on. Another question? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I might just add that something that we've been doing in preparing to release this expression of interest so that when communities apply and get going, that we can have these resources ready, is beginning to look at sort of really dig into what types of jobs, what types of skills, what types of educational requirements are needed for consolidated storage facilities. And then sort of, figure out what educational contexts and landscapes exist, and then identify gaps, and then create a framework so that when a community is ready, they can sort of apply that framework to their particular context and be able to sort of more quickly identify what are their existing capacities, and then in order to develop this pipeline, and then where DOE may be able to kind of support and make connections to better sort of, create that pipeline and ensure that, that there's connection between the workforce and the workforce needs and educational preparation for the workforce.
Thank you.
Great. And then we have just one more question. It looks like we got one in the Q&A tab. They're asking, what lessons from history, for example, CERT or CERT, or the Office of the Nuclear Waste Negotiator, do you look at as you shape your development and deployment frameworks?
Well, I can jump in a little bit from our past engagements in tribal communities. We see it as kind of like a three-part question or three-part answer. It was mentioned earlier that we have to recognize the past. We have to honor the past. We have to learn those lessons of the past and deal with potentially historical wrongs, whether that is going back, cleaning up mines, things of that nature. We need to make sure that that's part of the discussion. And then we need to recognize the fact that communities, tribal communities, just as the same as general communities, we have issues, needs. We need power. Nobody's willing to give up their power. And we all understand that power, I want to say, improves everybody's standard of living. And I think we all, no matter where we're coming from, we're on that path. And so that's important that we need to support that. And then kind of looking towards the future, kind of grounded in tribal philosophy, is that we need to be conscious of the environment and that whatever we're choosing to do, whatever we choose to put our talents, you might say, our resources and our time into, it has to be lasting and it has to be protective of that overall environment. So I think it's in those three areas that we have to zero in on and do a better job.
I'd add, God, this takes me back. Holy cow. My first hearing on the Hill when I worked for the Indian Affairs Subcommittee was in Flagstaff, and it was on open pit uranium, unclosed uranium mines. Who was there? Dave Lester. I mean, who created CERT, the Council of Energy Resource Tribes. They were dealing with, an incredibly extractive governmental industry approach to tribal energy. And what they wanted was that Dave and the rest of CERT, they wanted to transform that. What could tribes actually do to exercise energy sovereignty and maybe reverse some of the harms that have been caused in the past, but really transform it so where tribes actually were driving their own energy needs, energy systems, and could do things for the people that would basically raise the standard of living.
Mm-hmm.
I would say maybe the lesson I got out of all of that is you don't give up. sometimes things move slowly, but here we are talking
Mhm.
about something that could radically change the future of tribes, and tribes are pursuing it themselves. So I think it's amazing sort of where we come, but it gives me great hope, and it also just makes you think, God, miss people like Dave who were there, really there. Sometimes it felt like by themselves to fight for us.
Yeah, thanks.
I'll just add from we've done some considerable research at DOE through the national labs, looking at historical examples and what we can learn. So Office of the Nuclear Waste Negotiator was one of them, but also other domestic sort of case studies and examples of siting of nuclear facilities and non-nuclear facilities. And we also have done a deep dive specifically on the tribal aspects and tribal involvement on the Office of the Nuclear Waste Negotiator. And so I think in terms of sort of broader lessons, I think understanding that local and political specificity and the political context in which specific communities exist. So again, that's part of the listening. Coming back to the very beginning of our session, the importance of listening and understanding in order to tailor the process, tailor the collaboration, tailor the engagement, tailor the education. Education is certainly not one size fits all. And I mean, not to go back and keep tooting the horn of Native Nuclear in NC State's consortium, but, understanding that education and values and culture is it's best sort of provided together. It's about tailoring that information to the context. That's one big lesson. And another I would say is sort of partnering with local decision makers, and also sometimes local champions or local trusted voices, because there are we don't have to start relationships from scratch. We can, if we there are relationships that already exist and trusted entities that if we partner with, that information may be received in a different way. So those are a couple, and there are certainly others that could build on, but just to kind of mention that it's really important, especially with the starts and restarts in collaboration-based siting that some of you may be aware of. It's important to retain the information. That's what we do in knowledge management, but making sure that we don't forget things, that we do learn the lessons and we retain them as we go forward. So looking back as well as looking forward.
Thanks for those comments. I think we're at the end of the hour here, our time. And I just want to thank personally everyone that was on the panel today. I think it was a good discussion. I think it's definitely opening up some doors to further discussion. There's work to be done. And so, again, just appreciate you being online. So what I'd like to do now is kind of turn this over to our next panel group, Jessika Hernandez. I think she's coming on. Hi, Jessika. Take it away. It's all yours.
Thank you, Scott. Hello, everyone. I'm Jessika Hernandez of the Tapilam Cualchotecan tribe in South Texas, and I am the Director for Federal Programs and Strategic Initiatives at Native Nuclear. I'm very excited to present my panel today on next-gen technologies and partnership opportunities. So I'm going to run things just a little bit different from my panel because we have our expert panels in their areas of expertise. So I'll be asking them questions specific to what they are presenting, and then we'll have a group question at the end. Though, panelists, just so you know, if you have things to add in any of the areas, please feel free to jump in. So without further ado, I am going to introduce our expert panelists for today. Sarah Peden from Nuclear, Ed McGinnis from Curio, and Brad Williams from Idaho National Laboratory. So, Sarah, if you could introduce yourself, that would be great.
Yeah, welcome. So excited to get to be here with you all today. My name is Sarah Peden. I am the head of sales at Nuclear Artificial Intelligence. We serve about 40 reactors globally to do agentic AI, machine learning, and generative AI to do a variety of different business processes and really do it in a very secure fashion. So excited to talk about some of the new technologies that's coming out.
Ed, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Jessica. Yes, Ed McGinnis. I'm the president and CEO of Curio, which is an advanced nuclear technology innovation company. Our backbone technology is an advanced nuclear so-called waste recycling, although you'll hear from me later that it's anything but waste, our used nuclear fuel around the country. And we have a suite of other technologies optimized with our recycling, including an advanced small modular reactor and isotope production as well. So a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Brad, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, Brad Williams. Work for Idaho National Lab, but am based in Washington, D.C. I focus on nuclear energy policy and broader energy policy. Do a lot of different things. I was detailed to the Senate from 2020 to 2024. So everything energy related, nuclear related, I had a little bit to do with back then. Worked with Ed at DUE NE for about a dozen years. And right now I'm assigned to helping DUE figure out their fuel cycle and waste management strategy that's required in one of the executive orders that came out last May.
Thank you to all the panelists. We're going to go ahead and get started with Sarah and talk about AI. So Sarah, from your perspective, where does AI provide the most immediate practical value to organizations beginning to explore nuclear energy?
So I really think what it comes down to is that, AI is really good at doing a lot of different things. Some of them are around doing research very quickly, easily, efficiently, especially in a, complex environment like the nuclear industry, being able to summarize documentation, being able to get insights, being able to help with initial licensing, being able to summarize information and really be able to optimize a lot of the processes that typically in the nuclear industry have taken a very long time that involves a lot of manual work. And so it's able to streamline a lot of that research and knowledge management to be able to help people get information quickly, be able to be faster at getting licensing documentation out, and then being able to optimize a lot of the processes once they start to actually go live with the reactors.
So going off of that, and so that you can give us a little bit more information on what's currently happening, what are some early use cases in nuclear where AI has proven to be both safe and effective? If you have any specific examples, that would be great.
Yeah, so some of the things that we've really seen started out really in the machine learning world before agentic AI even came about. So, Palo Verde was the first plant in the world to actually start to do machine learning and algorithmic based CAP screening. So, if you're corrective action programs, really being able to optimize that screening, trending, and analysis process with corrective actions. Looking and being able to do some searching for procedures, being able to find, what are some best practice guidance with some of the regulatory and kind of, federal and quasi-governmental organizations like, NEI and NPO and EPRI, being able to use that documentation, that ability in AI to be able to look up referencing information, being able to look up licensing information. We also see it really around being able to help optimize the planning for outages. One of the biggest costs in the nuclear industry is actually the time that the reactors are down. When you have to have a refueling outage or a maintenance outage. So being able to use AI, both generative and machine learning algorithms, to be able to optimize your outage planning process and then being able to continue optimize during that outage and streamlining that process has been really helpful. Being able to get, project critical path insight so you know what you really need to be able to pay attention to. Also, some of the things around being able to find parts. So once you actually have a reactor that's live, you look at kind of the existing fleet of reactors in the US, And trying to find parts is actually becoming an ever increasingly difficult challenge because a lot of these things are, 40, in some cases 50 years old, 30 years old. And some of those parts companies have actually gone out of business. So being able to find that information that you need, being able to find the existing part, whether it's in your stock or someone else's, or being able to find information in the documentation around what those part requirements are, so you can be able to find a current part that's available that would meet those same requirements. All of these things really allow AI to be able to optimize non-security and non-safety related parts of the nuclear industry, and are all things that we're doing currently today.
Thank you for that, especially providing those examples. I know that there's a lot of question about how AI is impacting and what we're actually doing,
Yep.
since that's up in the air a little. And then, so the last question that we have here for AI. As new reactor technologies such as SMRs and microreactors gain traction, what role do you expect AI to play in supporting those deployments?
Yeah, so it's interesting, being a startup in the nuclear industry, but on the AI side, and then being able to help use AI to help support a lot of other, nuclear startups, or even, larger industries like, GE and others that are expanding out into the SMR space. Being able to streamline a lot of those manual knowledge management processes is going to be a huge value add for AI in those parts of the industry. Everything from streamlining document review for siting and design and operations, being able to use AI to put together your initial processes or your predictive maintenance schedules based on information from either your, sub vendors, or as kind of best practices from things you've been doing in other parts of the industry that still relate. Helping support early engineering and maintenance planning, whether it's kind of building out those processes and building out those knowledge bases internally, as well as you're bringing more people on, helping them get up to speed very quickly, to be able to understand what the regulatory requirements are, and be able to do that in a very small staff way. With a startup, every person is really expensive. Some of your labor costs are often one of the biggest parts of getting a startup going, and so being able to do a lot more quickly, safely, and effectively and efficiently, and being able to do it accurately, which is very important in nuclear, but being able to do that with fewer people, is something that we've got several of our customers, and I'm seeing other parts of the industry as well. That's a huge area of growth. And then really being able to, instead of having, a huge reactor that has processes that were, developed, 40 years ago, really being able to come in and really do digital first operations from day one. What is sort of the best practices? How can we be able to, take these new current digital technologies to be able to streamline the processes and the procedures from day one? And so when you're doing your initial licensing, having these really optimized processes being part of your standard process going forward from day one allows you to continue to grow and maintain very efficiently and very effectively.
Very exciting to hear all of the new things that are coming around the bend, for
We
sure.
think so too. A lot going on in the industry.
Yes, for sure. Thank you so much, Sarah. I'm going to switch gears now, and we're going to talk to Ed McGinnis from Curio Technologies. Ed, what is Curio's projected timeline? Well, first, tell us what New Cycle is, and then explain to us what's Curio's projected timeline for taking New Cycle from its current development stage to full commercial deployment, and what milestones will define our path to market.
Well, first of all, New Cycle is an advanced state-of-the-art technology and process for recycling what is more accurately described as slightly used nuclear fuel that's sitting around in about 90 locations in almost 40 states around the country. And this is all used nuclear fuel that is built up over the years after being discharged in a reactor after running for about 5 years, typically in the US. And it's been the government policies over decades not to recycle it, but to attempt to just throw it away directly. And our company wants to turn that absolutely on its head and turn it into a value proposition, an environmentally much more responsible way of then extracting what is contained in this so-called waste. What's contained in the so-called waste? A plethora of highly valuable radioisotopes, and even precious metals that are non-radioisotopes. Some of the most expensive metals in the world, the most expensive metal in the world, rhodium, is resident in large quantities in the 92,000 or so metric tons of used nuclear fuel sitting around this country. And in fact, we are in the process of commercially developing and deploying what will be the largest throughput, most compact advanced recycling facility in the world. It will be capable, for example, at full operation, of being able to provide 10% of the world's annual rhodium requirements. The revenue from that is profoundly large, but we actually have identified and we have offtake agreements and indicators for 10 radioisotopes and precious metals right now, for fighting cancer, medical, for fuel, for reusing uranium that has not been fully utilized in the used nuclear fuel after being discharged for the first time used in a reactor for about 5 years, plutonium, other sources for industrial space base. The bottom line is the used nuclear fuel that we're targeting, that we're going to recycle at national scale, when it comes out of a reactor, you've only literally used about 4% of the energy value. There's enough energy still resident in that material to meet all of the US electricity needs for the next 100 years. So it is a profoundly valuable source, and it is a profoundly huge missed opportunity to attempt to throw it away. Another key point is that our recycling technology has we've developed a design and a process where we do not use nitric acid. Now, all the reprocessing plants around the world use nitric acid to dissolve the fuel assemblies to get to the valuable radioisotopes and materials. By doing that, you're ironically increasing the amount of high-level waste. We have eliminated the use of nitric acid aqueous process. We use essentially a dry process. And that dry process, a pyroelectrolysis process, literally, we've already demonstrated after 3 years partnering with 4 national labs at the Department of Energy that we can reduce the original waste to about 4% of the high-level waste that will need to be permanently, deeply, geologically disposed of. 4% remaining. I call that much more environmentally responsible, and at the same time, we're doing it in part by extracting isotopes that are dearly needed in society for medical, industrial, space. And the last key point on what we're doing is that when we recycle and reduce it down to that 4% or so, that material will only need to be securely stored and disposed of in a secure manner demonstrated for about 300 years. That may sound like a lot, but if you do not recycle the material, certainly with our process, and if you attempt to throw it away like we attempted with Yucca Mountain, literally the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has a storage requirement, a safe, secure storage for 100,000 years. So why in the world would we want to throw it away when we're leaving it for generations to come in a much larger amount, when we could do justice to what we already did to dig it out of the ground and do justice to Mother Earth, actually, and I've said this many, many times, by fully utilizing the resources that we extracted from the ground and then do it in a way that's environmentally responsible. That's our technology, and we want to remove this Faustian bargain that customers, CEOs, or utilities and others have to deal with when if they're deciding to want to build nuclear. And that is, okay, if I build nuclear, what about the waste? Well, we want to offer a solution to that, so you don't have to look at your fellow colleagues and citizens and tell them that you just did a deal where you're going to have waste that's unsafe to be around for 100,000 years. That is not necessary. On a timeline, We have already completed, as I said, a 3-year lab scale demonstration to prove this process works. We're now in the process of scaling up in partnership with the U.S. Department of Energy and other industry partners. And we plan to have, within the next 3 years, approximately our first commercial quantities, market quantities of extracted material recycling. And by about at latest 2035, we plan to have 1 or 2 national scale recycling facilities. And these facilities not only will be ultra compact, but most high throughput, modular, the latest compactness, autonomy, but it's going to be a major jobs driver. It's a $5 to $7 billion facility that we will build. It will create, and we will have about 3,400 full-time generational jobs for the life of the facility, which is at least 60 years planned. And what's a beautiful thing, in my humble opinion, giving back to the community and having them be true owners and partners and benefit from it, the vast majority of those 3,400 jobs are trades-based. So that it's very accessible. We can bring high school and 2-year associates, highly trained, and then they're going to be in a position to be making some of the highest salaries, $125,000 approximately in today's economy at this facility. So it's a generational jobs driver. It is a major tax contributor to the communities, and it's environmentally responsible. So that's where we are.
I appreciate you talking about environmental responsibility because we as Native people believe a lot in taking very little from the earth, maximizing the uses of those resources, and then returning very little waste. And nuclear waste, the way everyone explains it or says, is something that's always on everyone's mind. That's the first thing that everybody talks about. So I appreciate you expanding on that. So beyond traditional used nuclear fuel or used fuel recycling, what broader applications does Curio envision for its technologies, such as medical isotopes or advanced reactor fuel supply or specialty material recovery?
Yes. So as I mentioned, we have already identified 10 isotopes and precious metals to extract. We're essentially an environmentally responsible, sustainable mining operation, if you will, while being a waste reducer. And so we do that in part by extracting every isotope and every precious metal that has market value. And it's a win-win. You pull it out, put it to good use, and reduce the waste at the same time. We have already identified a number, strontium-90, for example, very important for long-term power sources. Krypton-85, very important for medical imaging in the medical community, also very important for detecting leaks. The Department of Defense relies on that to detect leaks in reactor pressure vessels in our nuke subs. Who's the supplier of that? One, and that's Russia. It's not acceptable, and the idea of being able to rebuild our vital isotope production pipeline in the United States by reducing and tapping it from our so-called waste is a real win-win-win. There are many other radioisotopes that we plan to pull out there for medical industrial. We also are developing our own small modular reactor, HOPE, and aptly named. It's a homogeneous plutonium eliminating reactor. With the pairing of HOPE and our recycling, we will be able to produce actinium-225. This is a game-changing radioisotope to fight cancer. Actinium-225 then has a daughter isotope of bismuth-213. Very short half-life, up to 8 to 10 hours, but enough time once it's injected in the bloodstream to go at and attack your cancer cells if you have cancer. And after a very short period of time, the radiation completely dissipates. There's been trial runs with this already proving stage 4 pancreatic cancer, stage 4 brain tumors, after 2 to 3 years, cancer-free. So these are real wonder applications. And to think that you're extracting it, deriving it from what we have treated as waste. So it's time to really transform not only our suite of technologies that are available for tribal nations, states around the country, but also our approach and our thinking about how to manage our nuclear sector. Because at the end of the day, I could not agree with you more. We have literally built in to our business model the environmentally sustainable aspect. We think that's one of the biggest value propositions while doing it with full resource utilization. We don't have any right to extract uranium or other materials from the ground and use 5% and then throw it away. That's not acceptable. And also, it's not good business practice.
Thank you. So last question, real quickly. Which fuel types does Curio plan to prioritize for recycling in the first commercial facility? And how does that selection influence your market positioning and partnership strategy?
We plan to provide two fuel types. One is uranium-based, but it's going to be uranium that will be suitable for any light water reactor. We have 94 reactors in this country, and they're divided up into pressurized water reactors and boiling water reactors. We will be able to provide as much as a third of the annual uranium requirement a year for light water reactors, and also a very substantial amount for the HALEU fuel. That is the fuel of choice most commonly for the advanced reactors. A second fuel supply that we plan to provide is plutonium-based, but it's wrapped around as we extract it, co-extract it with other self-protecting radioisotopes, including some fission products, but not to the point where it affects the neutronic performance. And we're going to provide that to most of the advanced reactors. Our reactor is going to be using our plutonium-based fuel we call True Fuel.
Thank you so much for all of that information, Ed. Sure. We're going to shift over now to Brad Williams, who is going to speak on a couple of different topics. So Brad, let's talk policy first. We've seen a surge of federal policies, laws, and executive orders aimed at accelerating nuclear deployment and strengthening energy security. Which recent or upcoming policy actions out of Washington do you believe will have the biggest impact on nuclear development? And how can tribal nations position themselves to engage early and effectively?
This is a great question. And I've been trying to think about the answer. I think it's a number of things. I mean, there's been a lot to happen. So, in the last 5 or 6 years, we've modernized the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to try to improve the licensing of reactors to maintain safety, but do it more efficiently and effectively. Some of the executive orders also get to that and even look at trying to utilize DOE's authority, which is a little bit more collaborative, I think. A lot of people view where it's less formal. You can actually get folks in a room, have conversations, make decisions without having to hold all of the public meetings and everything. And I'm based in DC, but I understand it's worked very well in Idaho on various things, and there's a lot going on there. I work personally on the fuel cycle work, both the front end and now the back end. I think those are both critically important. There's been a call to quadruple nuclear energy, but and I think that's probably the biggest thing. But I think the why is probably the biggest thing, and it's not actually. So I think the answer is actually not law or executive order. I think it's artificial intelligence, and that taking over so rapidly, and data centers taking over so rapidly. Just not too far away from me is Data Center Alley in Western Virginia. That is driving energy demand like we've never seen before. The need for carbon-free, reliable energy is driving the world towards nuclear energy. 30 countries have committed to tripling nuclear. The US is now looking at quadrupling. But really, it's all AI. And it comes down to, I think, many of us probably remember the Terminator, right? We don't want Arnold Schwarzenegger showing up in Skynet. And it's a national security issue, whether the US wins the AI race and outpaces China and Russia, who are both trying to use energy for global dominance. It's a national necessity. And I think that's really what's driving. And these hyperscalers are able to take on the risk, pay more money, per megawatt hour than some of the traditional utilities. And that's honestly what's driving everything. I mean, Ed is looking at making better utilization of the fuel, and that's extremely important. But if we aren't planning to increase nuclear capacity, there's not a market for that. So I really think that's, at the end of the day, that's really what it is. And in Washington, where nobody can agree on anything, there's actually bipartisan support for nuclear. And I think, building on the conversations from the previous sessions, it's because folks are putting differences aside, putting politics aside and talking to each other and understanding what's important and how they can work together. I mean, I have a lot of pride in the fact that, everything I was able to do when I was detailed to the Senate for several years was hugely bipartisan. The bill that's behind me is actually banning Russian uranium imports, and we were able to pass that after they invaded Ukraine. Every single member of Congress, both the House and Senate, Republican, Democrat, Independent, every single member voted in favor of that. We didn't even see that with the latest, most obvious. Everybody should have voted on that, piece of legislation that just came out a couple days ago. So it's really a game-changing opportunity that if we all work together, including all of the communities, to do all of this, we really have a great opportunity. And I think that's where, the tribal nations and communities have a great role to play in, going back to what we heard before. What do the communities want? Right? We can't come in and I think this, I have opinions of what might be attractive and beneficial and help a community, but in some of the conversations I've had with states and other groups, what they want is a lot different than what I would think they would want. And in many cases, actually a lot less than, me with no authority was going to offer, the federal government to give. But we really need to hear and understand what the interests are, and then figure out how to work together and deploy those. And I think that's really where the communities can come together and work together on what's best, creating the jobs, creating the economic benefit. The sky's really the limit on what the potential is right now.
I appreciate that insight. And I think it's also important to note, reaching out to tribal communities and other communities is important, not just to find out what they want. This is just my own caveat, not just to find out what the tribes want or what the tribes need, but to allow the tribes and give the tribes the opportunity to make those decisions, not just be told what they should be doing. They need to be given the opportunity to make the decisions themselves.
Yeah. And I'm going to be completely honest. I mean, the government hasn't done it the right way, and
Correct.
getting that to shift. I know in the work I'm doing with developing the fuel cycle and waste management strategy, I mean, there's views where it's like, oh, well, this is what the community wants. And it's like, well, no, like you can't just predetermine it and say this is what we're doing. So that's really a major focus of the strategy. And through the process, I tried to reach out to anybody and everybody. We actually met, so some of the folks on this webinar might have been part of some of the conversations I've had. I work through the DOE has a formal nuclear energy tribal working group, and I work through them, and the group actually submitted a really great letter to the secretary on what it would take and what they're looking for, and can't say what's going to be in the final report, but in the draft that's been delivered, those things are all clearly called out. And I think that's where we need to go and where we will go if we're actually going to successfully solve a lot of these problems and maximize these opportunities.
Thank you for that. So let's make an adjustment and switch to fuels and waste management. The US is rethinking its fuel cycle and long-term waste management approach in ways that could reshape the entire nuclear landscape. So, what are the most important developments happening right now? And how might they influence opportunities or considerations for communities and tribal nations?
Well, I mean, you heard Ed talk about some of it, but again, I think you really hit the nail on the head. Take as little out of the ground as we can and put as little back into the ground, use everything. And that's been, the disconnect with nuclear. Right now it's cheaper to dig it out of the ground, use 5%, and then call it waste. So again, pre-decisional, nothing's been finalized, but I think the executive orders made it pretty clear the policy is shifting to let's maximize the beneficial use of our materials. Nuclear waste is an asset, not a liability. And the question will be, how do you economically maximize the use, or how do you target certain isotopes that have other, for recycled fuel or medical industrial processes. I'm personally very passionate about the isotope opportunities, but then there's other isotopes that may not have a commercial value, but have a really meaningful impact on disposal, and they're high heat, isotopes, americium, for example, that limits how closely you can condense the fuel in a repository, and then could potentially mean you need multiple. But if you can separate that out, transmute it in an advanced reactor or even an accelerator, you can address that as well. So I think embracing that, and again, looking at the world view, the national security view, there's the economic piece of recycling, but then there's non-proliferation piece. The world needs energy, right? The world's not, most of the world is not worried about making nuclear weapons. They need energy, and they will get it from wherever they can. And a lot of places don't have the natural resources, right? France recycles because they don't have uranium. Japan wants to recycle because they have nothing. They can't even, do mass deployment of renewables just because of how the island is situated. So countries don't want to be reliant on other nations. So they're doing what's in their best interest, and they want us to help them. So I think looking at this, rethinking all of those considerations, as Ed mentioned, reevaluating the economic opportunity, and then again, going to the quadrupling or tripling, we're going to need to use everything we have, right? And that we'll probably have to mine more natural uranium, but we can minimize that if we maximize the use of what's already been dug out of the ground.
That's great, because my next question was about uranium mining. So quickly, with the US moving to eliminate reliance on Russian uranium and strengthen domestic supply chains, what does this shift mean for American uranium mining and processing, and how might it impact tribal lands, local economies, or federal and tribal collaboration moving forward?
If done correctly, it's going to improve, the economies, improve collaboration, not impact tribal lands. And I know there's a long, ugly history with uranium mining, and I understand that. And I'm not a uranium mining expert. I when I was on the Hill, I worked on the front end a lot and learned a lot about it. The current technologies are so fundamentally different in situ recovery, which, I know it still has challenges and you're drilling into the ground and similar to fracking, but it's so different than conventional mining and milling, that I think it's a completely different it's largely a different conversation. But again, we have existing sites. We have a lot of existing sites in the US and other countries. So even eliminating Russia, and Russia actually didn't supply a lot of the mined uranium. So it actually, don't tell my mining friends, but it won't actually change the mining side all that much. It's the conversion and enrichment, which we need that capacity anyway in the US. But what it's doing on mining is restarting a lot of these sites that have been shut down, right? So there's already a mines, Wyoming, I'll say there's several mines there that were just on standby. So it allows them to start operating. Potentially there's going to be new mines, but to do that will come with collaboration and coordination. And again, just like the waste side, I mean, it's look at it as an opportunity. Say, oh, well, is this something that we can make a deal on and then get some benefits from? But again, it's going to take lots of different communities all sitting at the same table, to negotiate these things, whether it's
And allowing tribes to make those decisions
Yeah.
so that we can correct some past wrongs for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. And again, don't let, I understand in some situations tribes were a yes and then states overruled them, right? Like everybody needs to have an equal seat at the table.
Correct.
And then I'll give one last plug. There's also some innovative technologies that are actually focused on extracting additional uranium out of old sites. So it's actually cleaning up those old sites and the tailings. So that's another exciting opportunity. Similar to recycling, it's, you get more uranium, but you're getting it from, the waste that's sitting at a mine that needs to be cleaned up and turned back into a greenfield. So there's a lot of opportunities, but you're right. It needs to be a collaborative effort.
Thank you so much for all of that insight. So I've got one last question for the group. You guys can jump in and answer however you'd like. So last question for the group. As global demand for clean, reliable power rises, many predict a significant expansion in nuclear energy. So from your perspective, what will drive the next major wave of nuclear growth in the United States? And what should tribes and local communities be watching for as these opportunities emerge?
AI. I think you've heard that come up again. Suddenly, AI and the demand for AI and the demand for energy to power the AI is driving a huge push for nuclear energy. And we're seeing this not just in the US, but we're seeing this globally. Some of the things I think that would be really relevant for tribes to be able to consider is, one, what are the economic development opportunities? Get involved early, get in conversations, especially with SMRs. They have much smaller kind of footprints. They have much smaller kind of areas of, concern, your potential concern. So I think those are things that really are important for the tribes to be able to consider. Also being able to consider, are there areas on your land where maybe there was a coal plant or there's something that could easily be co-located, whether it is a large scale plant that takes much longer to be able to get through the development and licensing cycle before it can go live, or do you want to work with, potentially partner and do some sites for SMRs? I think all of those are going to be really interesting opportunities, kind of leveraging what you guys already have, and then really being able to mitigate and make sure that we can protect both people and land on the tribal lands.
And I would also just say, in addition to AI, which no doubt is that big bow wave creating this unprecedented demand for power, and doing it in a way without inadvertently increasing the price of electricity for residents around the country. Hence,
Oh, yeah.
we really need more capacity. But in addition to that, I think nuclear is in this unique moment, partly why we have bipartisan support, and that is whether it's climate change, the demand for increased demand, ever increasing, for clean, sustainable power that is 24/7. AI data centers, as you know better than I, needs continuous power, cannot afford interruption in power.
Yep.
But whether it is the increased demand as well for non-carbon emitting baseload sources, or whether it is just really electricity is becoming more and more omnipresent in all of our lives.
Yeah.
And we're moving towards greater dependence on electricity in a historical way that I don't think will ever go back. And so that results in a greater demand for nuclear. And it's not going away. It's a unique opportunity, but nuclear serves a plethora of needs. And AI is just the huge poster child reminding us right now how important nuclear is. The tribal nations, honestly, in my view, are in a unique moment in history to really get out there and really set terms that meet your interests. We have states, and I'm working with many states right now, and they're taking the same view. It's time for that state to take charge and set up his plan, not wait for Washington. In fact, go to Washington and say, here are my plans. Here are my terms that we've made. And the tribal nations are in a great moment, I think, to do the same thing. So it's a unique moment in the history of nuclear to meet a lot of needs and also to be a part of long-term generational prosperity in lands across the country, including the tribal nations.
Yeah, and I'm just going to echo what was just said and what I said before. I mean, it's the demand in energy, whether it's for AI, to have carbon-free, reliable, resilient, affordable, 24/7 power, globally, whether, if it's to address energy poverty, which I know the current secretary, that's a big priority for his, but it's the need for energy. And it's AI is the big thing now, and is a little different. But when I was at DOE, 2015 and a couple years after that, the big issue was plants shutting down because they were getting run out of the markets, for various reasons. They weren't economic. Several of those plants are now starting back up. And now we're actually talking about new plants, and the reason that back then they were trying to stop the shutdowns was because they're the clean, reliable, base load, firm power, however you want to describe it, that is needed. And I think that just recognition continues to grow. And I don't think it's going to go anywhere. And then again, to echo some points, we have a golden opportunity right now. You know, whether we agree or don't agree with some of the things that are happening in Washington and some of the bold actions are happening, right? I mean, I've been quoted on one side of the debate about using plutonium, and then there's a lot of others that have been on the other side. If we do this right over the next couple of years and we all work together, and actually come together, come up with common solutions, listen to each other and do it the right way, we really have a great opportunity for this new nuclear renaissance to be successful. If we don't do it the right way and we continue doing, the status quo that we've always done, then, we'll be talking about fusion the next time we do this in a couple of years. So, but I think it's a golden opportunity. And like Ed said, if you all should, communities should feel free to lead. Don't wait. The federal government is trying to move quickly, but sometimes they move too quickly and in the wrong direction. So, don't be afraid to get out in front and lead and work with local communities and states and regional opportunities. I think there's going to be a lot of those that can come in and, raise your hand and see what to do. A number of states are already doing it. I was talking to somebody earlier, Tennessee's trying to think of what version of the Silicon Valley term they can call themselves, for the new nuclear, corridor they're creating. And that's all just because the state decided they wanted to do it and step up. So it's a lot of opportunity right now.
Thank you so much for all of your insight and for everyone answering that last question. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Samantha for audience questions.
Hi, yeah, it looks like we have a few questions in the chat. First one, it was a brief question for Mr. McGinnis, how does your organization approach safeguards and non-proliferation?
We take it very seriously. In fact, when we started our company, we agreed there are going to be three priorities for our technology. And one of those is safeguard and security built in by design with robust security built in throughout the process and with our products. I spent half of my career in working in nuclear nonproliferation, so it's near and dear to my heart. So we have confidence that the technology we bring to market is going to be as safe and secure as any technology in the nuclear sector out there, in part because we're building the safeguard and security by design. We intentionally selected one of our 4 national lab partners as Sandia National Lab, which is a leading national lab, world lab in nuclear fuel cycle security.
Great. Thank you for that. And then looks like we have one more question for Mr. Williams specifically, but anyone else feel free to chime in. How might national level priorities of energy/AI dominance against Russia and China play into tribal engagement? I'm remembering Dr. Luarkie's point, using tribal sovereignty as a sword rather than a shield. Are these priorities at odds or are they complementary?
It's a great question. I think they could be at odds, but I think again we have the opportunity for them to be complementary, right? And and I like, I'll consider the sword analogy as being proactive and raising your hand, and it's I don't think it's at least I'll say North America, right? We're one North America, um, and hopefully have common goals and common opportunities. But at the same time, I mean, if a tribal nation doesn't want to have to be reliant on what the U.S. decides in these cases and wants to move forward, I think it's an opportunity. But I see it as being complementary in that tribes can stand up and say, hey, we're going to do this, DC, come with us, and you can come along for the ride and benefit as well. But again, it comes down to how we do it. I mean, if we do it right, it's complementary.
And I also would say, I think that, with the analogy of being able to be proactive from, a tribal standpoint, I think there's a lot of opportunities to be able to reach out to SMRs and see about building partnerships, being able to see if there's ways for, different tribal groups to be able to be early adopters for it, to be able to have, siting locations that can be, located on, reservations, being able to drive, some energy independence for, energy for tribal facilities. I also think that there's, potentially, economic opportunities if you are able to kind of site, SMRs on your lands along with data centers. Those are things that are in very high demand right now, that, don't take up that much space, but could actually be, strong new revenue channels for tribes. And you guys are able to work things on your lands a little bit differently than you're able to do kind of in most of the areas of the US. And so, there might be opportunities for, really kind of being on the forefront of it even.
Yeah, no, just a couple more thoughts. I would echo that completely. And there's a lot of talk about co-location, and that could mean anything. I mean, you could whatever you want. I mean, really, the sky is the limit. I probably get in trouble a lot for talking about Yucca Mountain since it's not moving anywhere. But my personal view is the residents of Nevada should be really, really upset at their elected leaders because it is a huge opportunity missed. They literally could ask for whatever they wanted, right? Like I drive behind cars with DC license plate. It says taxation without representation. Nevada could be representation without taxation, right? They could have free power. They could have literally whatever they want. I mean, it's such an opportunity that and whether that's waste or it's anything, right? I mean, if it's, host a data center that's housing all the, CIA secrets, right? And you could write, you get a blank check, whatever you want, so think big, think bold, and it's a great opportunity.
That's great. Thank you guys so much for your input. And Jessika, if you just want to close this out, and yeah, thank you.
Sure. I want to thank all of my panelists for sharing their insightful information. What we heard today reflects a powerful theme. The future of nuclear energy is not just technological, it's relational. And as the industry grows, and as new policies are formed and there are innovations in fuel or waste or isotopes, and as AI is emerging, the most successful paths forward are going to be built on partnerships, transparency, and respect for tribal and community priorities. So, tribal nations have an essential place in these conversations, like I said before, not as observers and not as being told what we need, but as leaders and collaborators, innovators, and decision makers. And so, we're looking forward to continuing these conversations and building relationships and sharing knowledge with each other so that we can create those pathways that honor sovereignty and strengthen resilience and potentially open doors to new opportunities. So thanks again for being part of the dialogue and for the important work that the panelists are doing, but also that you, the attendees, are doing in each of your communities and leading in your organizations. So I'm going to turn it back over to Chris and Scott for some closing remarks and final thoughts for today.
Jessika, thank you so much. And to our last group of panelists, thank you again for all that knowledge and information you share. I want to take a few minutes just to go over two things, and then I will also reserve some time for Scott and any last minute question that we want to share in terms of a prior session. Two things. Number one, I want to share that the National Intertribal Energy Council has been a co-partner host in this effort. We are a 501c6 National Intertribal Energy Trade Association dedicated exclusively to advancing tribal energy policies, investment opportunities, and business developments for Native American tribes and Alaska Native villages and corporations. Our mission is simply to promote and protect the common business and energy interests of tribal nations, tribal leaders, and their partnerships. And to that end, we are working towards building our relationships and partnerships like we have done here with Native Nuclear. The second part of this is more of a next steps. And I will quickly just share one slide here to show our audience. In terms of next steps, this is what we have been working on at NITEC. We've been putting together a number of seminars. Starting in October, we did a utilities conference at ASU. We did a policy impact and roundtable at the UC Berkeley a week ago. And then we are now with this virtual seminar. Future activities that we're planning is a leaders retreat in early December. And that is a reset to get ready for 26. And in 26, two main things I think we can work towards with this group, and hopefully it'll be a start for us working more towards these next steps for our group. One is a Energy Futures Conference. And right now we're looking at one of two locations in the Oklahoma, Texas areas. We are working potentially with the United Indian Nations of Oklahoma on a spot, whether that's somewhere in central Oklahoma. There's even a tribe in southern Oklahoma that might be of interest, and or somewhere like Dallas. If not there, then we would, of course, look to a Energy Futures Conference in DC. And to this end, what we are looking with this conference is taking these seminars and others like them to really host a national event where we can bring, if you will, these different curriculum, these different industry areas, and then build upon the seminar activities like we've done today. And we definitely would queue up a number of discussions and planning with support not only from our partners, but also industry towards an Energy Futures Conference next year. Secondly, we are also planning to do a DC fly-in with respect to tribal energy matters. And in short, we're looking to advocate for a tribal energy hearing with the Senate and/or House. We'd like to also do a congressional briefing for staff members with folks who have Indian energy stakeholders and constituents. And we'd love to have partners working toward that. And NITEC, to bring this to a close, is working on a broader level under the Intertribal Energy Network, which is a loose affiliation of intertribals working towards a lot of these events. So I will conclude with that remarks on that, and I begin a transition. But before I do, I want to personally thank all our moderators and our speakers today, and our panelists. We do sincerely appreciate it from the Intertribal. And I want to give a special shout out to Scott and your team, in particular Samantha, for helping Eleanor, who's on our team with the Intertribal, put together all the work behind the scenes on this. So Scott, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. Yes, I would like to just have a few comments or two, and maybe I can share just one slide that we have, share my screen. I just want to kind of highlight Native Nuclear and what their goals are and what we're all about. I think today was great. I think it was like a real beginning to open up the conversation in general in the nuclear space for tribal communities. The three main goals that we have is to essentially engage the younger generation about career pathways in nuclear, simply because we feel that there's going to be a tremendous need coming on down the road. And tribal communities need to have that information and have that ability to make a choice for the next generation if this is something they want to pursue. We also see ourselves as engaging tribal communities to provide trusted information in reference to the nuclear area or nuclear industry. And we want to engage with all tribal communities that have an interest. We think that we fill a gap there to provide that education. And then probably one of the most important things and kind of dear to my heart is the idea of trying to help facilitate tribal energy partnerships. It was said today by many of the last panel members that there's some tremendous opportunities that are around the corner. But the issue is before you can take advantage of those opportunities, you need to be made aware what's available. And so those are the three things that I just want to leave in reference to today's discussion. And that is, we're out there trying to support communities, tribal communities, and we want to make sure that we provide a resource for them. In closing, also, I want to thank all the back end, Samantha, Eleanor, you guys did an amazing job, kept us all on track. So that's fantastic. And so with that, I think we might have a minute or two for just a few parting questions, if you will.
I believe
Eleanor's-
earlier, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, please. I was just going to say either you or Eleanor, if there's a question.
For sure. Yeah. It looks like earlier we got a note from Dwight. It's a bit of a long one, so stick with me. But he said, I've been supporting the Palo Verde nuclear generating station since 2010 in various roles, planner advisor, field engineer, and project oversight. I recently returned from supporting the restart effort at Palisades, and one thing that stood out was the clear shortage of experienced nuclear professionals, with many nearing or entering retirement. I'm currently working on launching training and development initiatives to help fill those workplace gaps. I'm curious, what efforts are underway to build a sustainable pipeline for the next generation of nuclear energy professionals, especially in support of future projects?
I will take the first stab, and I think it'd be okay, Scott, if there's an expert on the panel or the group that can also finish up.
Sure,
for NITEC, for the seminar series, we think that's a subject matter that we can talk about in terms of workforce development, in particular expertise in this field. Secondly, this is also a subject matter that we would bring up in terms of the Energy Futures Conference, because this is the same concern in other areas, other sectors of the tribal energy universe that is a concern and focus for many tribes, industries, and partners working with tribal energy development. So if folks want to add to that, I'm happy to yield.
Yeah, I would just say, in one of my former lives, I ran DOE's nuclear energy university programs. So have some experience there, and it continues to evolve. But addressing workforce, both that NE is historically focused on the scientists and engineers, nuclear and nuclear related fields. But as we work to bring in, onshore to the domestic supply chain and build things here in the US, we realize we need the technical workers, the tradecraft workers. There's social scientists and communicators. It's all across the board. So again, I think there's opportunities to work with DOE, potentially other agencies, to develop some of those programs. I know DOE and NEAP are always trying to reinvent themselves in terms of what they can do, and they're now a line item, so it's a little bit easier for them to separate from having to support the technical programs directly. The labs also have programs and are working to establish new programs. But again, I think this is an opportunity to lead. I mean, it's going to be a huge gap across the board, where we need innovative thinking on what these look like: apprenticeships, traineeships, partnerships between labs and universities, and sharing expertise and community colleges. So really needs to be a focus, and it's quickly becoming an issue because all the companies that are emerging are just stealing from other nuclear, employers. So we need to get some people from the outside. So
some people trained up.
I would like to jump in on that also. Dwight, if you're still here, please reach out to me. I am the vice chair of the U.S. Women in Nuclear Professional Development Committee, and we are working on a project specifically in this area, and not just scientist or engineer focused, but also trades and everything across the board. And I am hoping, it is my priority to reach back not just to universities or colleges, but also to high schools and even middle schools, because these kids right now do not know that these jobs exist. And so they're not going to be ready. And so I think it's really important for us to prioritize that and reach back as far as we can to show the kids what jobs exists, and also to let them know that while yes, a lot of nuclear does have to do with science or with being a scientist or an engineer, that is not the only job that exists. And so that's something that's very important to Native nuclear and also to US Women in Nuclear. So Dwight, reach out to me. I dropped my email address in the bottom of the chat. So I look forward to talking to you.
Well, we'll need to find him because it doesn't look like he's in the audience. But I do want to say, Dwight, if you are out there, thank you for your service to American nuclear energy. It is because of the hard work of you and the whole industry that we have been able to achieve this moment. And as someone who was anti-nuclear recently in my own life, I think we can I have a lot of gratitude for how hard people have worked to prove this technology now, because it used to be experimental, and now we have gotten to a place where we all have more confidence. And if we can continue the mentorship traditions of nuclear energy and pass this knowledge on, we hope to be able to empower you and the many other nuclear professionals and gratitude to any other nuclear professionals who are on this call who have really shown a level of cooperation and professionalism that I'm proud of as a Californian and as an American.
Mhm. Thank you. Great. Any other questions out there before we sign off?
I want to make one more plug just because I intended to say it earlier, related to all the legislative opportunities. I'm not exactly sure where they are in the process, but just keep a lookout. But one of the things we were able to do during my time on the Hill was authorize a program called Fission for the Future. It's in the CHIPS and Science Act. And DOE has, I believe, $100 million in hand from FY24 funding to support that program. And what it is an extremely broad technical assistance program to basically support anybody and everybody that's thinking about anything nuclear related. And I know they had a FOA on the street. I don't think they've made awards, but hopefully it's something they continue doing, either annually or maybe it's an open solicitation. Also GAIN, I know Emily Nichols is on here. Maximize those opportunities, especially the funding that DOE is able to provide. It could really help move a lot of these things forward.
Thank you for that, Bradley. I definitely will be giving you a call.
So let's just hold off on any more questions, Samantha. I think we can answer them maybe in a written format. We can send back answers from the group from that. And maybe reserve the last 2-3 minutes and give back, if we can, that minute time to our attendees. And so once more, thank you again for joining us. This was an excellent opportunity to just showcase all the good work that's happening in the nuclear field. And Scott, thank you again for you and your team and everything that you've done to help us make this a success. So from my end, in Navo, Ekehet, and Chicago, that means thank you very much.
Thank you very much as well.
Thank you,
Okay.
everyone.
See you all.
Thanks, guys.
Mhm.
Take care. Thank you.
Good job.
Have a great day, everyone.